great city. Right on Leeds. We'll tell you. But wait a minute. Right on Leeds.
Hello Leeds, and how are you doing? Welcome to the third episode of our podcast Light on Leeds, where our guest this week is Chris Nickson, an author and music journalist. He's lived in Leeds all of his life, apart from the years he spent in the US from the age of 21. Several series of his novels are set in the city in different time periods. They are all up next on my extensive to-read list. At the end of the podcast, as usual, you'll get the chance to hear some music recorded here at Dr. Shakamoto's. This week, it's the Jolly Code who will be entering your lucky lug holes. Let's get started. Here's Chris Nickson. So our next guest on Light on Leeds is Chris Nickson. Hello, Chris.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, it's my pleasure, honestly.
Oh, brilliant. So, Chris, first of all, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm a writer. I've made my living as a writer for, 25 years this year, in fact. Primarily a novelist these days, historical crime novels, but also a bit of music journalism, a lot less than there used to be. That was pretty much my living when I started out as a freelancer.
Okay.
But it's turned more towards fiction because fiction is more important to me now. Maybe not quite as lucrative, but as you get older, you go with what's more important.
Yeah, of course. And so a lot of your series of books are based in Leeds, is that right?
They are, yeah. I was born and raised here and moved back here 6 years ago almost. So it's the place I feel in my blood, yeah.
That's great. And so would you say that Leeds really is sort of part of the character in your novels?
I think Leeds is a character in my novels. It's in its changing faces through time. My books go from the 1730s up to the 1950s. And obviously Leeds changes a lot in that time, but there are some aspects that don't change at all.
Okay.
For example, think of the layout of streets from north of Leeds Bridge up to the hedgerow. A lot of those, my main character from the 1730s could walk around, and while he wouldn't recognise any of the buildings, except for maybe Holy Trinity Church and St John's Church and a couple of the pubs, he'd still be able to find his way around without any problem.
And that's because the layout of the streets haven't changed at all?
We've got new streets in there, obviously, but the Calls, Call Lane, Brigger, obviously, Kurgat, things like that, just the same as they were.
Yeah.
So there's that sense of continuity in among all the change.
And so when you were writing, did you make a conscious effort to make sure that it was Leeds-based?
Yes and no. I feel I can only write about some place I've lived.
Yeah.
Because I have to know it, to feel what the people are like, to make it real. I could never have something set in London. Not only do I not know how it's laid out, how the pieces connect geographically, I don't understand the thought processes. So I think that's pretty vital for me.
Yeah. And so when you've been doing your research for your books, especially the historical nature, have you found out things about Leeds that you just didn't know?
Oh, lots of things over the years. I have shelves of Leeds history books. All sorts of, probably bizarre little things. For example, 1910, I believe it was, they had what was essentially audio live streaming from city varieties down to the pack horse of the acts that were playing at City Variety. It was broadcast via a wire down there.
That is amazing.
Yeah, it's over a century ago.
Yeah. So was that about the time when they were doing the good old days and things like that at the varieties?
Well, no, I mean, the good old days is a recreation, but it was music hall, yeah, absolutely.
Right, okay, so a similar sort of thing.
Yeah.
Wow, that is amazing. Because obviously one of my favourite facts that I tell anyone who will listen is the whole thing about Louis de Prince and the first moving pictures of Leeds Bridge.
Well, actually, his disappearance is even more fascinating.
I agree.
And that's a subplot in one of my books.
Really? And is there the Edison connection?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Because I mean,
Which I'm not going to give away, but
No. Well, he was a very, very dodgy character. I've just recently read a novel about Nicholas Tesla. And it's always difficult when you read a novel to know how much of it is fabrication and how much of it is actually rooted in historical fact. But I've read various things where Edison comes up as a very sort of sketchy man.
I think that's probably quite true.
Yeah.
And he certainly, well, you never meet him in my book. The nearest you get is a letter from the French investigator who's looking into Leprince's disappearance and who's been over here looking at the Leeds end of things. So but yes, it's...
Yeah. It's an interesting history.
It is, definitely. I mean, Leeds history fascinates me, which is curious because when I was 18, I couldn't wait to get out of here.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
But
I think a lot of people are the same way.
but you ended up coming back here.
Yeah, I started getting interested in Leeds history when I lived in the States. I'd come back and see my parents and pick up whatever new books. Then eBay started out, back when you could still get bargains on eBay.
Yeah.
So I'd be picking up these old Leeds history books for nothing. Then I had to get them shipped over to the States. And then when I moved back to this country, I had to ship them all back over. But that's worth it.
Yeah.
I built up this knowledge, covering up a wide swathe of Leeds history. It's just, and it's kind of a passion of mine, I suppose, really. It's one of those I can bore people for hours on it.
I don't think you'd ever bore me. I mean, this podcast is about Leeds. It's great to hear any interesting facts extra than the things that I already know about. And there's just such a lot of rich history to take from, I think.
Oh, it is. I agree. My series set in the 1730s features the man who was the constable of Leeds, Richard Nottingham, who actually was the constable of Leeds at the time. Although the actual facts about him are pretty sketchy to find, which is kind of a surprise in a way, even with parish registers and what have you. But I based that, well, the constable would have been an honorary office. He wouldn't have been a sort of proto-copper, which is what I made him. But you bend the facts a little to suit fiction. And that's a fact. That's the thing. It is fiction. It's not fact.
Yeah.
Likewise, when you're writing something historical, you just got to be very careful and weave the facts in, not do sort of information dumps and bore people.
Yeah, but you have to use a little bit of creative license, obviously.
Oh yeah, but you've got to also make it so the reader feels they've been there, that they've walked through the streets. And I mean, the things about history that people don't realise is it was very loud and very, very smelly.
Yes, I can imagine that.
So,
especially because there were so many sort of tanneries and the whole wool industry.
Yeah, and no sanitation.
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
You had middens in the courts. I was reading something about Waterloo Court off Kirgate. When they cleaned it up, this was the 1840s, I want to say. They took out 75 cartloads of manure from the court.
Really?
And that wasn't horse or dog manure.
Oh, we're talking human waste.
We're talking human excrement, yeah.
Oh, wow.
No wonder there were cholera outbreaks and all that. So, but this is before we got sewerage, and it's when Marsh Lane was so bad that people who lived in the basements there, their walls would constantly be dripping.
Just an unbelievable different time, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And yet very believable.
Yeah. And great to write about.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. So you did, I did read that you moved to the US. When was that?
I was 21 when I moved there. So that was the mid-70s. And stayed there for 30 years.
And what took you there in the first place?
I married an American.
Oh, well.
Then we got divorced and I moved from the Midwest out to the West Coast. Married another American, we had a kid, and we ended up getting divorced, and I moved back here. So, but I spent 20 years in Seattle, which I dearly loved.
Yeah.
And I'm very glad I don't live there now because it's become such an expensive place. It's all the text, Amazon and Microsoft and God knows what else, all the tech bros.
They're all there now.
Yeah, house prices and rents are out of sight. So, and so is traffic. So I have a lot of friends who still live there, and from what they tell me, I wouldn't recognise the place anymore. So I'm better off out of it, and
do you
I'm
feel
happy
like
here.
you were there for the best years then, really?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it was 3 years after I arrived there. Time magazine, I think it was, called Seattle the most livable city in America. Now, whether that has my moving there has something to do with that, I really wouldn't like to say. But no, I loved it there. I really did. It's a gloriously picturesque place. You have sea, you have mountains. You can look down and see Mount Rainier in the distance, and it's fabulous in that regard. Much better than Leeds in that regard. But,
right.
I've realised that Leeds has my heart. Always will.
Yeah. And so when you went out there as a young man, how was that coming from Leeds, going to a place like Seattle? It must have seemed just a world apart.
Well, the Midwest was, because it was like moving from black and white into Technicolor, really. Things were open on a Sunday. You had all these cars. I learned to drive over there, and I remember driving on the freeway there on I-75. I had a leather jacket in the back seat of the car. There was spring and window down, and Springsteen's Born to Run on the radio, and I just suddenly thought, this is America. So you have moments like that. But Seattle itself was yet another thing, because it was much more I was living much more in the city. There was much more city living there. So it could walk places more easily. And in that regard, because it was more neighborhood based, it was like this mix of America and England. And there was a big artist community there at the time, because it was relatively cheap for artists to have lofts and live. So I got to know a lot of those people, and became part of a community there, which I'd never been in the Midwest. So in that regard, it was great. And I find coming back here, I've become part of a couple of different communities here.
Okay.
Because Leeds has changed as well, I think, from when I moved. It was just perhaps starting to change when I left, which was right before punk started. Mm-hmm. And that galvanised so much.
And there were quite a few big punk bands from Leeds, weren't there?
Oh, yeah. Gang of Four, Mekons, Delta 5, probably a couple of others that don't spring to mind right now. But yeah, definitely. And I feel bad I missed out on that, because I would have loved to have been part of it at the time.
Yeah.
These people are the same age as me, and I know the guys in the Mekons now. I got to know them in the States, weirdly.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's... and that musically was very important for me, even if it was at a remove. But my tastes have gone more and more towards roots music and what we generally call world music. So that's what I cover these days. Okay.
And so what sort of bands are you seeing in Leeds at the moment?
Well, actually, the last band I saw in Leeds was the Mekons.
Oh, really?
That was in April. Don't go out to many shows anymore, because I spent so long going out to 3 and 4 shows a week. And now I'm just kind of burned out after so many years of it.
Yeah.
My first show was 1967, the Incredible String Band. So I think now I go to 3 or 4 shows a year, and that's probably about it. Coming up, probably be after this is broadcast, there's a little festival of Balkan music coming up in Leeds in the middle of June.
Oh.
And a friend of mine has a choir that's part of that, so I'm going to that. And there's going to be a Leeds band involved in that, the Ukrainians.
I've heard a lot about the Ukrainians just lately.
Yeah, because they were originally started out as an offshoot of the Wedding Present.
Right.
Who, of course, were a Leeds band. So,
Yeah.
and then they became a band in their own right, and really good one as well. I saw them about 10 years ago, something like that. So
Yeah, I've heard lots of great things about them. I had a friend who went to see them just a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, and she thoroughly enjoyed it.
oh, great, a lot of fun live.
And so at the moment, are you part of sort of creative groups in Leeds with your writing?
Not really, because writing is a very solitary thing, and I tend to isolate myself. I'm not a very social person, so I work and I'll occasionally see a friend one-on-one, things like that. I was meeting somebody this morning, a historian I do some work with. We're planning an exhibition, small exhibition next year about the 1908 suffragette riot.
Oh, that would be amazing.
And we did an exhibition last year called The Vote Before the Vote, which was at room 700 at the library. It was about the Leeds Victorian women who worked towards the vote, and it went up to 1903. All these figures that people don't even know about, but who deserve to be known. And that was sort of triggered by a book of mine called The Tin God, which is sort of partly about a woman running to be a poor law guardian in 1897. And this exhibition next year has to do with a book of mine that's coming out called Rusted Souls, which is set against the backdrop of this suffragette riot. And while there was a riot, it was more the unemployed men than the suffragettes.
Really?
They got bad press.
Right. Oh, okay. Well, that's fascinating. So you've got this thing that you're working with your historian friend that's coming up. Is that next year, did you say?
Yeah, it's going to be next April.
Okay. Will that be in collaboration? Because the library seem to be doing lots of great stuff at the moment.
Yeah, that's actually going to be in the Family and History Library. And then it'll be going around different branches. So it's be a slightly travelling exhibition around Leeds.
Yeah, but it's a great thing because, again, I think Leeds can have a reputation of not really shouting out about all the great things and the brilliant things that have happened in the city. And I think slowly we seem to be getting better at that.
I think we are, because there are more people willing to do it now.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. You've got to have the people who are willing to do it.
Yeah.
And it's good to see.
It is, yeah. And Nick was saying earlier, Nick had, he was talking about when we did the bid for European culture, you know, which obviously didn't come off, but they'd already had so many people getting together and collaborating from all sorts of different walks of life across the city. And he was saying that we're still sort of benefiting from that, even though it didn't come to fruition. Still, these people connecting with each other about different cultural aspects. You know, we're still gaining the benefits from that.
I think that's true. I mean, Nick works in theatre, which is a far more collaborative medium than mine, but I see it a lot in different things. And one of the most heartening things to me is the way young people are getting involved in things. And you've got this underground welling up. I mean, you have things like Wharf Chambers, what's going on at Hope Foundries and Mabgate and stuff like that. And a lot of different collaborations. The city's on a creative high at the moment. We have some great people working in drama for stage and small screen. You know, we've got Lisa Holsworth, Alice Nutter, Kay Mellor, Sally Wainwright. That's pretty stellar. And,
it really is, yeah.
And what Nick's doing in theatre, well, what Lisa Holsworth's doing in theatre as well with Black Teeth and a Brilliant Smile.
That's right, yeah.
Plus we have Channel 4 coming here.
Which is very exciting.
I'm not sure how much difference it's going to make, to be honest with you. And notably they're in a place where in 20 seconds they can dash across to take the train back to London.
Yeah.
So I'm reserving judgment on that, but it's hopeful.
It is.
I'm a cynic, let's put it like that.
Okay.
When it comes to Southerners, I'm a real cynic.
Okay. I do know one of the, I can't remember who her name is. I'll try and find out and put it in the notes. But I follow one of the ladies who are heavily involved in it and in the Channel 4 thing. And she was saying on Twitter that she'd had loads of congratulatory messages and welcome to Leeds. And she's saying, I've lived in Leeds my entire life. So that's quite heartening to know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that there are people from Leeds involved.
Definitely.
And what I see what you're saying. What we need to do really is wait and see how that trickles down.
Yeah.
And how it affects Leeds itself.
Oh, very much so, yeah.
And that they're using the creative talent that already exists in Leeds. Yeah. I'm really enjoying Gentleman Jack at the moment on BBC on Sunday.
I've watched the first episode. I think it's a fascinating story. But and I do need to watch at least one more episode before I fully make up my mind. But the impression I got was that it couldn't make up its mind if it's Jane Austen or Fleabag.
Yes, I totally know what you mean, especially with the looking at camera.
Yeah.
The breaking the fourth wall. And I wondered whether that was unfortunate in that both things had been written at a similar time and came out. I can't see Sally Wainwright copying it from... That's what I thought.
And it's a great device to use, but I think you're right. It's just the timing is unfortunate.
Yeah, because it was such a big part of Fleabag.
Yeah.
And I noticed, I won't give you any spoilers, but on the last episode, there was a very similar incident where the person that she was talking to noticed her looking at camera and picked her up on that. And that's a very big thing that happens in Fleabag.
Yeah, of course, with the priest, yeah.
Yeah, and as I was watching it, I thought, that's unfortunate.
And of course, it would already been in production by the time
That's
that was...
what I think happened, yeah.
So, yeah.
But it's just great to see Yorkshire being on TV.
Oh, of course,
in a prime time slot and hearing those accents.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think it's... Much as I hate to give any praise to the dark side of the Pennines... It would probably never have happened if Coronation Street hadn't done well. Yeah,
you may be right. And a lot of great actresses and writers have come from Coronation Street.
Oh, yeah. One thing Coronation Street did is show people the strength of Northern women. Mm-hmm. Ina Sharples, Elsie Tanner, a whole bunch of them. And we see it much more over here, I think.
And just the North being on TV, I think for a long time it's very South-centric.
Yeah. It still is. Mm. I listen to Radio 3 a lot in the car. And there's one person on there with a Northern accent.
Really?
Yeah. And there's still a fair bit of received pronunciation. Maybe it'll change sometime.
I do feel like it is getting better, especially with Channel 4 went through a real big phase of making sure that they had regional accents and then also people with disabilities being the announcers.
Yeah, yeah. But BBC needs to do some catching up. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. So can I ask you to tell me anything that you think is maybe not so great about Leeds at the moment?
Yes. The council has no respect for Leeds history.
Okay.
And it's been true for years and years and years. Leeds history, it becomes disposable to them.
Right.
I take you back to 1955. I was just a year old then myself. There was, on Lower Briggate, the oldest house in Leeds. What did they do? Tore it down. And it dated from, I can't remember if it was 1519 or 1619, one or the other. But, it was knocking on. And it's gone for nothing. There is the gable end of a house that dates from 1600 in one of the little yards off Lower Briggate.
Okay.
And there's something there that's flats now. Dates from 1699. It was a coaching inn for years, the Royal Hotel, which was actually, by the 1920s, a gay and lesbian bar.
Okay.
In fact, there was 2 bars, one for men, one for women.
Really?
Yeah. But there's so much of the history that's gone. It's the only way you're going to really see the history now is take a walk along Commercial Street and look up.
Yeah.
You see the Georgian buildings there. And back in the 90s, the council was thinking of getting rid of the market, for God's sake.
I know, and I absolutely love Kirkgate Market. It's one of my favourite places.
Yeah. And even now, the council does the market no favours at all. They'd rather, I think, get rid of it and put in another phase of Victoria Gate.
Yeah, I worry about that gentrification of Leeds because I think that what you're doing is taking away the character.
Oh, you are, yeah.
And my son is at university in Liverpool, and Liverpool's a fantastic city, but one of the greatest things about Liverpool, I think, is the amount of independent shops and little places, and there must be a lot of council help with things like that. And to me, there's not much point walking along a high street when you've got exactly the same shops as you could get in any other city.
Yeah.
The same chains, you know.
I mean, the rebranding Quarry Hill as Soyo, south of York Road. For Christ's sake, it's Quarry Hill. It's been Quarry Hill for centuries.
Yeah.
But it's not as you can't make an acronym out of it.
No. Can't make a snappy hashtag.
No, you can't market it. And personally, I think whoever came up with that should be put on a rail, tarred and feathered, and carried out of town. And anybody who agrees with them, exactly the same thing.
Do you think that's to do with too much of a focus on looking forward and not enough reverence for the past?
Certainly not enough reverence for the past, but I think it's a focus on the quick buck.
Right.
The council's been happy to put a lot of its eggs in one basket, and that basket is retail. That's a dangerous thing to do.
Yeah.
Because retail will crash again at some point.
Of course.
And my understanding is Victoria Gate's not really done well anyway.
It's just so expensive. I mean, I've occasionally gone to John Lewis, but in general, it's a beautiful building, but I don't go in there very often because it's just, I don't know who they're marketing this stuff for. It's not for your everyday person in Leeds.
Well, I think they're aiming for the same people who go to Harvey Nicks and do the shops in the Victoria Quarter. The difference is it's the wrong side of Vicar Lane for that.
Yeah.
And I think for Leeds people, and I couldn't tell you why. I don't think anyone could really tell you why. But it's like this little psychological barrier. You get that east side of Vicar Lane, that's the market.
Yeah.
And the market is a beautiful thing. We have a history of markets going back to the start of Briggate in 1207.
1207, really?
Oh, it was a planned community, was Briggate. And again, it was a planned, maybe not a retail community, but the lord of the manor needed money. So he laid out these burgage plots between what's now the hedgerow and the river. And the people were exempt from service in the fields. They were craftsmen, tradesmen, and they were exempt from a lot of taxes. Plus they got what they call burgage plots, burgage man's toffs, they were called.
Tofts,
where they could grow food. I think it was half an acre, where Bermontofts is now.
Wow, right, that's where that comes from.
Yeah. So, it was a plan. It was quite possibly the first planned community in the country.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I read that. I think Kirkgate Market is the biggest covered market in Europe.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So it's just such a shame if anything ever happened to that. It's such a huge part of Leeds' character.
Yeah, it is. It is. it's part of the DNA of Leeds.
Definitely. Yeah, and it would be a shame to get rid of anything like that in the name of progress.
Progress is a false god. It's necessary, but you can't worship everything about it. It's the fatted calf.
Yeah, and there are just some things that you can never replace.
Absolutely,
Once
yeah.
they've gone, they've gone.
Yeah, yeah. I agree entirely.
I read, I've been reading, I think it's called How Leeds Changed the World.
Oh, yeah,
by-
Mick McCann's book.
Yeah, fantastic. And I was reading in that about the Red House, it was called, and it's where I think the core shopping centre is now. And there was a story about, was it King Charles?
Yeah, King Charles I.
I mean, now when you stand there and you look at the car, which is a rubbish shopping centre anyway,
Yeah.
and is just the architecture's awful, to think that house stood there, and I would never have known that unless I'd read that in his book.
Yeah, it was. The story is that Charles I had been captured. He was being escorted down to London, and he was staying there overnight. And it was called the Red House because it was the first red brick house in Leeds.
Yeah.
And John Harrison, a merchant and philanthropist, the man who built St John's Church,
Okay.
sent over a tankard, supposedly of ale, but it was filled with gold coins for the king to try and make his escape. Whether it's true or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
But where the Red House stood is where King Charles Street is now.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And again, it would be horrible if we were still getting rid of things now that had that much historical import.
Council would do it without blinking if there was a little money to be had from it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that was a bad thing about Leeds.
Yeah.
So what would you say, personally for you, is the best thing about Leeds?
Oh. Apart from the fact that it exists. Because if it didn't, I wouldn't be here. I'm not sure I can pick up one thing that's the best. I mean, my family history here goes back 195 years. And the fact that in some areas, for me, I can go up to Cross Green and actually touch the houses where my grandfather and my great-grandfather lived. Heritage Open Days a few years ago, I was at St Hilda's Church up there, and I happened to walk into the back room, and they had a list of the students from their St Hilda's C.V. Primary, which no longer exists, who got scholarships, and to look and see my dad's name there.
Oh, really?
Things like that. The connection to history, the personal connection to history for me.
Yeah.
My books, my Victorian series of books feature the Victoria Public House at the bottom of Roundhay Road, which was a real place. And my main character's wife is the landlady. She owns the place. My own great-grandfather was the landlord there from the 20s to the 40s. My dad will go over there in the summer so he could go up to the living quarters and play piano for hours on end without anyone disturbing him. This is what I love about Leeds. I have all these personal connections. A woman who's an ancestor of mine, whose husband owned a painting and decorating business. A lot of my ancestors did that. It meant they could do bugger all else, really. When he died, she took it over. She's listed in the 1871 census as employing 7 men and 1 boy. So, Victorian times, a woman could run a business.
And that's not normally how you would think of it.
No, but it's true. Because, Leeds women were strong. They could do that. And also I can go up to Beckett Street Cemetery, and there are 2 unmarked graves there, which are great-great-great-grandparents of mine.
Wow.
Those are the things that make Leeds special for me.
Yeah. And it must be great to be able to talk about all that in your novels and impass some of your love and enthusiasm about Leeds and its history.
I think I get the enthusiasm across. I've had a couple of reviewers say that if you cut me open, the word Leeds will be written right through me.
Yeah.
Not for a few years yet, but we'll see what happens. So, yeah, it is. I don't get tired of writing about it. The Victorian series of mine, which I started in 1890, I'm going to carry on until 1918, because I realise it's hopefully they're good books. They seem to get decent reviews. But more than that, they're also telling the story of a family, and they're telling the story of how Leeds changes in that time.
Okay.
So,
Is there a reason why you stopped at 1918 specifically?
Yeah, well, or will be doing when I reach there. The next one that's coming out next year is 1908, so I still have a ways to go.
Yeah.
Because the main character, who is now detective superintendent in charge of Millgarth, will have retired at that point. He'll be knocking on for 60. So, and the end of World War, just after the end of World War One, is an appropriate time to end it. And I've also, at that point, will have covered every decade of Leeds from the 1890s through to the 1950s. Because I have books set in the 20s, 30s, 40s and 50s.
So there's no period really about Leeds that you haven't written?
Well, there's still some. I mean, I've covered the 1730s, and I've got a series, the second one comes out this autumn, set in the 1820s, and then moved to the 1890s. But I've covered a fair spectrum. I mean, there's stuff I'd love to cover. Leeds during the Civil War. I've tried, but I've yet to write a book that works in that. Also, Norman Leeds.
Right, yeah, fascinating.
But I tried with that and haven't managed a book where the story works. And that the story has to work.
Yeah, the story has to fit within the time setting.
Well, and the characters have to come alive. Mm-hmm. And if the story doesn't work and the characters don't come alive, no point.
Yeah, exactly. So where can people find your books?
Online. But I would prefer people to use bookshops.
Yeah.
We have Waterstones, we have Blackwell's, and library, of course.
Yeah.
Writers are always very happy when people use libraries, because something a lot of folk don't know is when you take one of our books out of the library, we get 8p.
Really?
It's paid once a year, and that mounts up. And if you don't use libraries, you lose them.
Yeah.
Leeds libraries have been really, really good, considering how squeezed the council's been by the Tories. Mm-hmm. But keep on using them.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of great events that Leeds Libraries are running at the moment.
Oh, God, yeah, absolutely.
A real coordinated effort. I've been to some just amazing events, and then you find out about, different communities in Leeds and how they've contributed. I think that's all just
it's vital.
Amazing. Yeah.
Leeds has always Leeds has been a multicultural society for a long time.
Yeah.
And I'm really pleased it's staying that way and getting more and more so.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that I absolutely adore about Leeds. I was speaking to Nick about that. I'm from Beeston, and there's just a huge range of people from all over the world.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone rubs along so well together. And I think it's really useful. I think it opens your eyes to other cultures and,
Definitely.
why people do the things they do. And that actually, it doesn't make any difference to your life, your day-to-day living, whether somebody does something slightly different than you.
Yeah, I agree entirely.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of the things that I adore about living in Leeds.
Yeah, one of the wonderful celebrations is West Indian Carnival.
Yes, it's
Fantastic.
amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
And we always have, it used to be called the Beeston Mailer, but I think they've changed it to Festival to take account of the range of people now that live in Beeston. But the Beeston Festival, I go to that nearly every single year in June on Crosslots Park. And what a great celebration that is, of just such a wide range of people, all the different foods that you can eat. You know, you can have your hand painted in Mendy.
Yeah.
It's just beautiful.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot to celebrate about the open spaces in Leeds as well.
Yes, that's right.
Thinking of Holbeck Moor back in the 30s, a week before the Battle of Cable Street in London,
Yeah.
Oswald Mosley and his fascists were up here to speak for a rally. And he came up with, there were about 1,000 as black shirts, and they were met by 30,000 Leeds people just saying no.
That is just such a great story.
And that is the kind of thing that makes me proud to be from here.
Yeah, exactly. When we first moved to Beeston, we'd moved from York, so going from somewhere that is not multicultural at all.
No.
And then we weren't in Beeston very long before the whole bombing incident happened.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously the people were from Beeston. And, you know, my mum was very worried. But there was TV crews everywhere. And one of the great things that I heard was that somebody had bussed in a load of racists, basically on a bus, to try and whip up division between the white community and the Asian community. And actually a lot of very hard men from Beeston, white guys, went and met that bus and told them in no uncertain terms that we don't need any help from anybody else, thank you very much, and sent them packing. And that
Good.
really, really helped. You know, it warmed my heart to think that that's
It's a
what
continuity of the 30s, really,
happened.
isn't
Yeah,
it?
so great. What we always ask our guests to tell us about is, even if you've been a resident of Leeds for your entire life, is there anything you can tell us that might be like a little secret hidden gem? So it could be a restaurant or a bar or a walk, anything that you think that people might not know about.
Oh, boy. I'll tell you about something that you've maybe never noticed. If you walk along the Calls towards Leeds Bridge, just before you get to the bridge on the left, there's Pitfall Street. It used to be known just as Pitfall. Go down to the bottom of Pitfall, and right there is where the Leeds water engine used to be.
Okay.
The Leeds water engine was built in 1694 and drew in water from the river, connected it up to a reservoir which is up by St John's Church. And then for those who subscribed, there were pipes offering running water to their houses.
Really?
Yeah. So even back then, they were digging up the streets and laying pipes.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. I have passed Pitfall Street before.
Yeah.
And wondered about the origins of the name for a start.
I still don't know the origins of the name, to be honest with you. It's just
Yeah.
such a fabulous name.
Yeah.
I mean, we also used to have, it was right by the river, and it's basically where Sovereign Street is now.
Okay.
That used to be called Cinder Island.
Cinder Island.
Cynder.
Wow.
And there was an old water mill on there with the absolutely amazing name of Flay Crow Mill.
Really?
God only knows where that came from, but yeah.
Oh, that's a great fact. Yeah, and so is there anything there that marks this out to anybody, or would you just have to have
No,
your
you just got-
amazing knowledge?
It's just one of those things you pick up and, no.
Yeah.
I mean, you never even know Cinder Island was there now. And people used to
Cinder
live on
Island.
Cinder Island, so it's,
Oh, wow, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming along today.
it's been my pleasure. And thank you for having me.
No problem. And I think, did you tell me that you've got a bit of an anniversary coming up in February?
It's next year, March, and mark 10 years of me publishing books set in Leeds.
Oh, fantastic. And you're going to have some celebrations?
That's the intention, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'd like to.
Well, that'd be great. So you can come back on and tell us
Love
about
to.
all of that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
No problem.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Chris Nickson, a fabulous guest and a veritable goldmine of Leeds facts, I think you'll agree. There'll be links to Chris's social media in the podcast notes. We've got some exciting guests in the pipework, so do keep listening, and if you'd be so kind as to like and subscribe to Light on Leeds, we'd be very grateful. Leeds fact for this week. Did you know that in 1903, Buffalo Bill came to the city with his Wild West and Congress of Rough Riders show. What a sight that would have been to behold. Almost worth building a time machine to experience that. As usual, that fact is courtesy of Mick McCann's brilliant book, How Leeds Changed the World. This episode of Light on Leeds was recorded at Dr. Shakamoto's in Hunslet, was engineered by Jess, Penn and produced by Will Gurrey. Stay tuned to hear the Jolly Code with Dead of the Night, recorded here at Dr. Shakamoto's, and we'll see each other next time for episode 4. Bye!